You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Inside the Fox 59 CBS 4 podcast studio, welcome to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast. Alongside Mike Chappell and Joe Hopkins, I'm Dave Griffiths. Appreciate you all tuning in as we continue our dive through the Colts off-season plans, I guess, from our perspective. You could say we talked quarterback last week. We're talking wide receiver this week. And I think it's a great week to talk wide receiver because we can juxtapose what the Colts can do, should do, might do with what the two Super Bowl teams did last offseason. And really, they were both went in diametrically opposite ways with what they did at wide receiver last offseason, and they both wound up in the Super Bowl. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the coaching search, an update here from Indianapolis. But first start with some non-coaching news across the NFL. We do know now, guys, that the Nyheim Hines trade, the conditional pick that the Colts received in response for that, or in return for Hines, is a fifth-round pick, 165th overall. That's according to a Bills sideline reporter. So, Chap, there was, I think it was between a 4 and a 5, or maybe even a 4 and a 5. And I can't remember, but I know it could have at least gone up to a 4. So that's at least some minor good news. That's not a fourth-round pick. It's going to be a fifth-round pick. And, well, you go into the draft without the fifth-round pick this year.
Yeah, it was one probably that'll work out best for both sides. Nyheim never really lobbied to leave, but I think he realized that he had reached the end of what he could do here. So they gave him a chance to go elsewhere, and I thought he was going to get a chance to go to the Super Bowl. I guess he could still, but not as a player.
No, exactly. And what a special moment he had in Buffalo with his Joe kick return for a touchdown in that first game since the DeMar Hamlin injury. So that could be, and we'll talk about this at length more when we get into running backs, we get into draft stuff. But the backup running back position certainly could be something the Colts address in this year's draft.
Yeah, I know they'll have Zach Moss as a part of that trade going into next year, and he did some good running towards the end of the season, but not really that guy, that pass-catching specialist. And we saw times this past year where Jonathan Taylor was a bit of a liability in pass pro. I'm sure that'll be something he works on this offseason. I'm sure having a bum ankle throughout the year doesn't help either. But running back is certainly a spot where I'm sure when you get to the middle and into the draft, the Colts are going to be looking around.
The NFL Honor Show is this Thursday night. We're taping on Wednesday, so by the time you listen to this podcast, you might listen afterwards. So we're not going to spend too much time on this, but we'll go through as we name the yearly awards like Most Valuable Player, Defensive Player of the Year, Walter Payton Man of the Year, as well as the 2023 Hall of Fame class. Of course, Mike Chappell on the Pro Football Hall of Fame committee, former Colts Reggie Wayne or Dwight Freeney could possibly be in this class. So for all our viewers out there, Mike, blink twice if either Wayne or Freeney got in.
We had our meeting, 2 weeks ago, and so I do know who got in, who didn't, and on Wayne and Freeney, I'll blink twice if they got in. Okay.
Aha. There we go. Well, you all know out there now what happened. So congratulations or best of luck next year, depending on what exactly was just going down.
I would blow the confidentiality that we have, but I kind of like doing this every year, so I think I'll kind of keep things to myself until we're allowed to share. Well, not we, when it comes out on Thursday night.
Well, whenever you decide to retire, Chap, it's going to be a banger of a day. So
that's one. It's like when somebody tells you something really great off the record that you're not supposed to use and all that. You want to go out with a bang. you want to go out with a bang. So it'll be something important. I don't know whether you decide to retire and then you find something, or you wait until you get that great story that is going to ruin your reputation because you're going to blow confidentiality, but everybody will read your story, so I've got to figure that one out.
Picks for MVP this year in the NFL. It was really a 2-horse race for most of the season, maybe a 3-horse race with Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, but I would be very surprised if it's not Patrick Mahomes winning this award, because everyone on every show that I've seen over the past month has kind of pointed his way. I thought the Eagles, without Jalen Hurts, might even give more clout to his to his chances. But nope, people in Philadelphia are certainly very happy to have Jalen Hurts, but it's probably most likely to be Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, when you kind of take away from his weapons cabinet, especially with elite receiver like Tyreek Hill, and he still puts up those kind of numbers that he did. Just doing less with more is pretty unbelievable. So I think it's Patrick Mahomes running away with it.
Very obvious.
Well,
Chap.
I guess the way I look at it is the Colts couldn't beat Jalen Hurts, but they beat Patrick Mahomes. So, I mean, Hurts has got to be the MVP.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I think.
If I had a vote in this, I would vote Hurts. I thought he had that special year. He lifted them. It's apples and oranges. It's like the ongoing thing now in the NBA. Who's the greatest of all time, LeBron or Michael Jordan? Why do you have to have one? But it isn't we do, and I'd vote for Hurts, and it would be close.
I think the stat, what is the stat? Like if Michael Jordan played as many games as LeBron, he'd have 4,000 more points right now. We're not talking about LeBron and Michael Jordan, though, right now. That is a discussion for another podcast and another time. Offensive Player of the Year, you got some great candidates this year, like Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, but also Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill. And this award has really become more so the best non-quarterback over the past couple years to play in the NFL. Like we saw Cooper Kupp last year, and Jonathan Taylor was certainly one of the candidates. But players of that caliber in here, and Justin Jefferson had a heck of a year as Vikings wide receiver. Tyreek Hill had a heck of a year as Dolphins wide receiver too. Those two probably the top two candidates up there, and we'll get into receivers in just a bit. But both of those guys could certainly be a candidate for Player of the Year. I'd lean toward Jefferson. But either one of them is perfectly fine with me. Chap. Same
with Jefferson. And this is one thing that I like that the NFL does. I don't think baseball does. Baseball doesn't have an offensive player of the year, don't they? Just have MVP?
Yep.
See, I think you can be the offensive player of the year on a crappy team. You can. And I'm one of those that doesn't believe you can be an MVP on a team that doesn't make the playoffs or doesn't advance. MVP means you lifted the team around you, but you can have a great season. Jonathan Taylor last year would have been a great example. So I'm glad the NFL does this. But, yeah, I think Justin Jefferson, boy, you look at where the Colts are and you think, boy, would you love to have a young, game-breaking receiver, which we can dream on that. But I like Justin Jefferson.
Joe, Defensive Player of the Year. It's weird to see the players you listed here not have Aaron Donald's name in there, but there are a couple other really great performances this year on defense. Chris Jones, Chiefs defensive tackle, perhaps most among them. Colts fans should be thankful for Chris Jones to give him a win. Maybe they shouldn't be thankful. Maybe they would have wanted another loss at this point afterward. But hey, thanks to Chris Jones's potty mouth, the Colts got that victory over the Chiefs early this year. But if you take out that play, boy, he was just about as good as you can get for Kansas City this season.
Yeah, he was terrific and continued his great play down the stretch. But I got to tell you, my vote would be Nick Bosa. I thought he was just unbelievable off the edge. He also, made his presence felt in the playoffs. And he's just one of those guys where, and Chris Jones is the same way. I mean, all these guys are elite. Michael Parsons as well. Played really good football, banged up for most of the year. But the way Bosa played was just fantastic.
Offensive Rookie of the Year, Brock Purdy, Kenneth Walker III, Garrett Wilson, all had very good seasons. Kenneth Walker, man, if he had stayed healthy this year, this would probably be more of a debate. But Brock Purdy going undefeated as Mr. Irrelevant, I think that's going to be tough to get over him. Even though I would love to have Garrett Wilson on my team for the next 4 years on a first round pick contract. And I would love to have Kenneth Walker III on my team too, from whenever he was picked in the draft. I can't remember, but he had a sensational season out in Seattle until injury kind of cut him short. But Chap, a couple young playmakers. It'd be hard for me to pick against the quarterback in this one.
Well, it's a quarterback with a big story, with Mr. Irrelevant and all that. So I think it's probably Purdy. And I always wondered during the season, how does he really look to be the quarterback of the future for that franchise? That's not what this award is. It's for what he did when they were down there after their first two quarterbacks. I think Purdy gets this on sentimentality, if nothing else.
Well, he has more of a chance than Jimmy Garoppolo to be the quarterback of the future of that franchise, with Kyle Shanahan coming out the other week and being asked, hey, does Jimmy have a chance with you guys in the future? And him basically just being like, no. So it's Brock Purdy and Trey Lance over there, or who knows, somebody else in San Francisco. Just not Josh Johnson, again, the Indianapolis Colts great Josh Johnson, and playing on his 38th team in the NFL throughout his illustrious career there the other week in the championship games. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Sauce Gardner, Aiden Hutchinson, Tariq Woolen all had very good seasons. Sauce was, like, as a rookie being so close to a lockdown cornerback, I was really impressed with the year that he had, Joe.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's Sauce. I mean, Hutchinson and especially Woolen, one of those cornerbacks who wasn't drafted as high, to come up with as many interceptions as he did was impressive. We talked about him in the draft last year. Like, his size and speed was freakish, but we thought it might take a couple years. Nope, he gets in there in Seattle and does it right away. But I just think the play-in and play-out consistency of Sauce Gardner was special.
Comeback player of the year. There were a lot of good choices this year. Saquon Barkley, having a tremendous year in New York. Christian McCaffrey getting traded to the 49ers, and really, well, he had a good first half of the year, but even a better second half of the year in San Francisco. And then Geno Smith, they wrote me off. I didn't write back, though, becoming the starter in Seattle and leading the Seahawks to the playoffs in a year that no one had any expectations for them at all. I would love to see Geno Smith get this award, Chap. I wouldn't be surprised if Barkley wins it, because it's the that filthy New York media bias, you know. But Geno, like I said, I would love to see Geno win this award.
Agreed, but I think Barkley does get it. I thought, as much as people talked about the emergence of Daniel Jones, I thought Saquon carried that team a long way. So, good for him, and he's going to get a good payday. And then you look at McCaffrey, what he did to the 49ers, he was the difference. He just was. But I kind of lean towards Barkley.
Well, what is Geno coming back from? Just being bad?
Just being bad. That's
being benched?
Yeah,
I don't understand.
Benched.
I always understood this as like you come back from an injury or something of that nature, not just like, being a backup for a while and then coming back into the starting role and doing a good job. So I got Saquon in this.
That's fair. I get it. I'll allow it. Coach of the year. Once again, great candidates left and right. Nick Sirianni of the Eagles, Kyle Shanahan of the 49ers. You got to consider them after making the Super Bowl. Doug Peterson of the Jaguars, bringing them from the depths of the NFL, except when they play the Colts in Jacksonville, all the way to the playoffs and winning a playoff game, cutting back 27-0 in the playoffs. Sean McDermott of the Bills, giving them another season. Brian Daboll of the Giants, taking another team with no expectations and making them something spectacular. Daboll and Peterson are the two for me, just because of the massive difference, Joe, in expectations preseason to what they were able to do during the season. Either one of them I would be perfectly fine with winning. The other three are all good seasons, but you expected something from all three of those teams. The other two, you expected nothing, and they delivered something tremendous week in, week out. Yeah,
I'm with you on those top two. My guy's got to be Daboll, though. If I had to rank the talent, I would say Jacksonville has more, and he just did less. He did more with less in New York.
What do you think, Chap, between those two or maybe one of the others?
I think Daboll probably gets it. I'd probably go for Peterson, because much less was expected of them. We never expected anything from Jacksonville. And I think what we saw, what his influence on that franchise and on Trevor Lawrence was amazing. And that's why, as we've talked about, the Colts having to get their quarterback and their coach right this year, because right now Jacksonville's got a leg up on everybody. And I don't think this year was a fluke. I like what Doug Peterson did there, not only for the franchise but for the quarterback.
Really interesting between those two. I think Daboll, like I agree with you, Joe, that the Giants had less talent than the Jaguars. So Daboll did a better X's and O's coaching job to put them in places to succeed. Peterson took over a franchise that was culturally deficient in every way possible and turned them into a winner. Took what was a rookie quarterback who had a wasted first season and actually turned him into a Well, I think Trevor Lawrence always had a confident streak, but reinforced the confidence within him to take significant steps forward in his second year of the league. So what Daboll did on the field with X's and O's, Peterson did maybe more work behind the scenes, building a culture that is a winnable, a sustainable culture in Jacksonville, which we have not seen really before too much. You might look back a couple years. Well, we haven't seen since the Mark Brunell era. I might as well say that. And the Tom Coughlin era. Syracuse University, Tom Coughlin, by the way. Just throwing that out there. Have to. But so different jobs they did, I guess, to really amplify their specific characteristics and their traits. And like you said, like a coach has to be both, has to be X's and O's and behind the scenes. But from the Colts' perspective, you'd like somebody who's really good at both. But if you get someone who's exceptional at something and can really build from there, and then rely maybe on assistants to either coach up or then enforce culture around the place, then you have a coaching staff and a team that can really take steps forward from year to year.
Yeah, and I was totally impressed with the leaps and bounds that Trevor Lawrence showed from having a not a very good coach last year with Urban Meyer to what they did this year. And like I say, that's if you're going to be any good as a franchise now and in the future, you've got that quarterback. And I was totally impressed with the way he handled Trevor Lawrence.
And I don't want to come out here and saying that Doug Peterson did no X's and O's or that Brian Daboll did nothing with that culture, because both are certainly true.
In any given year, I mean, either of these guys could easily win this award. Mm-hmm. I just think there's two great candidates this year. And what Daboll did with Daniel Jones is equally impressive to me. A guy who was much, not as highly touted as Trevor Lawrence coming out of the draft, and to get what he got out of him with almost no wide receivers to speak of, throwing to guys like Richie James.
Of course, Richie James.
Poor old Richie James, rookie tight end Daniel Bellinger out there. I thought that was pretty impressive, but like I said, both of these guys very deserving.
What does Hancock Health's membership in the Mayo Clinic Care Network mean for you? It means our independent health network now has access to the knowledge and resources of the world leader in medicine. It means your Hancock Health doctor can now consult with Mayo Clinic specialists to confirm a diagnosis or treatment plan. And it means that together we're making health possible for you. Learn more about our new clinical collaboration at hancockregional.org/Mayo Clinic. Need new windows? Contact your hometown team today. Hometown Window and Doors are Central Indiana's premier, locally owned, full-service Anderson window dealer with master installers. From design to installation, the Hometown team handles it all. They carry unlimited options with competitive pricing. Call them direct to get 25% off your windows if you call within the next 60 days. Hometown Windows and Doors gives you all the perks of a national brand with a hometown feel. Visit them at hometownwindowteam.com today. Let's provide a quick update from the Colts head coaching search. The reports this week over the past 7 days are that there could be a third round of interviews in Indianapolis with a couple of these candidates. 8 total candidates had a second interview with the Colts. We'll list them. Jeff Saturday, Brian Callahan, Bengals offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen, Eagles offensive coordinator, Raheem Morris, Rams defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, Giants defensive coordinator, Rich Bisaccia, Packers special teams coordinator, Aaron Glenn, Lions defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero, Broncos defensive coordinator. Now, of those 8, Evero has already accepted a job in Carolina to be their defensive coordinator. So Frank Reich stealing him right out from under the Colts' grasp, but not really. If Evero was one of the people that the Colts were strongly considering, I doubt that he would have taken a job as defensive coordinator in Carolina just yet, would have waited for this to play out. So we know that Evero is not going to be Colts head coach, but those 7 other guys are all possibilities. And the word is that Jim Irsay has spent a significant amount of one-on-one time with these second-round candidates. Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated reporting that, saying that the interviews have been creative, long, and lasting up to 12 hours with these guys. How on earth do the Colts not know what they want to do after talking to 8 different guys for 12 hours each, plus talking to them beforehand for 4 or 5 hours, whatever it was? You've been in a room or on Zoom with all these guys for 16 to 20 hours, and yet still we do not know who the Colts are taking as head coach because Jim Irsay tweets out this week that the decision will come in days, not in hours. What is going on in Indianapolis?
Well, I think the one thing when they said there was a possibility of a third round of interviews, I mean, what would, let's say you're brought in for a third round, so now you're going to bring your A game? I mean, now you're really going to put your best foot forward? So I think that would have done a disservice to the candidates. I think they know who they want. I'm convinced they know who they want, and that's based on nothing other than trying to connect dots. Days, not hours. Two things play into that. The NFL frowns on other teams making news on Super Bowl week. They don't like that. So, although if I'm the Colts and I want to name Brian Callahan or Raheem Morris, gosh, I'd just do it and get it out of the way. Because it's going to be a big news locally, and it'll be a blip nationally, and then it'll go away and people go back to the Super Bowl. But I just think it points to the fact that you can't hire Steichen until Monday. You can't, until the Super Bowl's over, you can't finalize anything with Philly's coordinator. I think that's where they're going. I just do. I've said all along, we've talked, it needs to be an offensive coordinator because you're going to bring in a quarterback in April, and he had better develop into a franchise quarterback, and that's what I want my coordinator to do. So we'll see. But I think there's an announcement Monday, and then a press conference Tuesday or Wednesday with somebody. But let's just get this over so we can move on.
Amen to that. Joe, anything further to add from everything Chap had to say? I agree with him that if the NFL is not a big fan of teams making news this week, there's a chance that the Colts already know what they want to do and just are kind of putting it off right now.
Yeah, it's just them and the Cardinals without a coach. And if both of these owners of these teams are on the same page, because it's their entire brand of the league that they're all bought in on. So I understand that. I'm just can't wait for them to make the announcement so I can hopefully put the fear that Jeff Saturday will be the next head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, I still think there's a chance out there, but then again, if that's who they're going to pick, wouldn't they have just done that already like a week or two ago? I don't know. I'm done trying to make sense of it.
Like I've said before, if they want Jeff Saturday, it's that Jim Irsay wants Jeff Saturday. And they're doing all these interviews, and then Chris Ballard would want a third round of interviews just to keep Jim Irsay from picking Jeff Saturday. That's just what it feels like to me, that you're trying to bring in 800 different guys to show Jim Irsay what they are capable of and how they are different than Jeff Saturday. That's my general feeling toward this process. So I won't go too much further into detail there, but there are some Colts staffing changes. It appears the Beech Grove hamster has taken a break. Mike Chappell's Wi-Fi has died, so Joe and I are going to continue this podcast as a duo instead of a trio. But we'll continue with Scotty Montgomery. The Colts running backs coach has left Indianapolis to become running backs coach and assistant to the head coach in Detroit for the Lions and head coach Dan Campbell. That according to the NFL Network. He had done, Joe, some good work with Jonathan Taylor, obviously. Taylor had a tremendous amount of natural talent, but to see what he did in 2 years there, that was impressive. And so the Colts, so Scotty Montgomery is leaving Indianapolis. Whoever comes in as head coach will have at least one new assistant coach to sign there. Of course, there will be plenty of those, but officially will not be bringing back Scotty Montgomery.
Yeah, and that was probably going to happen for a majority of the position coaches, especially on whatever side of the ball the head coach controls. But good for Montgomery getting what I would assume is a promotion to be assistant to the head coach there in Detroit, a team that's really up and coming and looking to do good things in the future. I mean, they were this close to the playoffs this year. They might be in it next year.
Not the assistant regional manager, but the assistant to the regional manager.
That's
there,
right.
Scotty Montgomery in Detroit with Dan Campbell and the Lions. SI is also reporting the Colts have blocked defensive coordinator Gus Bradley from interviews for the same position around the league. And you can do that as a team if a coach is under contract. And the reason, Joe, the Colts are doing this, again, the report continues, is that a couple of these guys that the Colts have interviewed for their head coaching position, a couple of the candidates, have expressed interest in bringing Gus Bradley back on as defensive coordinator next year. So there are certainly a few of them who would not, but given the fact that you could try to read into this and say if the Colts are really intrigued by some of these offensive guys, whether it's Callahan or Steichen or even Bisaccia with the Packers or Jeff Saturday, that they would have some interest in bringing back Gus Bradley because their offense, their focus is on the offensive side of the ball, and Bradley's focus is on the defensive side of the ball. And you look at what he did last year, there's certainly some positives and negatives to the Colts defense last year. I happen to think that they completely lost it down the stretch because they just had they were beat. They were tired. They couldn't keep holding up what was one of the worst offenses in the league anymore. And that's why we saw things like the fourth quarter collapse in Minnesota and in Dallas, and just in general, the last couple games of the season being less impressive than they were near the beginning of the year. But all that to say, it's not out of the question that Gus Bradley returns, and maybe some defensive staffers around him there as well.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be opposed to that. I thought overall Gus Bradley did a good job with that defense. I kind of throw out that last quarter or so of the season just because at a certain point the spirit of your team kind of breaks, especially when you're asked to basically carry the team for so long. The defense could play the best game possible, but if the offense can't score more than 10 points, it doesn't really matter. Or 16 or whatever their average was this year. So I think that's encouraging. I think it might be a sign that probably more than likely a sign that an offensive guy is coming in. Like take Wink Martindale. He runs very different defense than Gus Bradley does. So it wouldn't make sense for them to bring in Martindale and then also try and keep Bradley if, Martindale was their guy and they're just waiting to announce it. So, but of course that's all speculation. But you gotta hope if they're blocking Gus Bradley from other jobs that they plan on keeping him.
Right. That would be a jerk move, we'll say, to keep it PG if you're gonna be blocking Gus Bradley from interviews and then not sign him.
Yeah,
at the end of
that's
the
a good
day.
way to make some enemies.
Yeah, exactly. For real. No kidding. And to lose respect around the league from coaches or whatever, from anybody.
Need new windows? Let the Hometown team help. Hometown Windows and Doors is Central Indiana's premier locally owned full-service Anderson dealer with master installers. From design to installation, we handle it all, carrying nationally known brands like Anderson with more options and competitive pricing. Call us direct and get 25% off your windows if you buy within the next 60 days.
Please contact your Hometown team today. We are Central Indiana's premier locally owned full-service Anderson dealer.
National brand, hometown feel.
The story of Hancock Health is all about you and everything you need to live your healthiest life. Like Hancock Regional, one of the nation's safest hospitals, and an independent health network with over 70 doctors at more than 30 locations around East Central Indiana. We're growing and evolving to help further your story. And we're just getting started. See all the ways Hancock Health and you can work together to make health possible at hancockhealth.org.
All right, Joe, let's dive into wide receivers. It's going to be where we focus for the rest of this show here. We talked quarterbacks last week. I thought the next most logical thing would be to go to wide receivers in terms of how we're going to attack this offseason here on the Colts Blue Zone podcast. By the way, you can follow us on Twitter at Colts Blue Zone. Follow what Mike Chappell has to write because hopefully he'll be able to email us stories, and the hamster will be back on the wheel by then. At fox59.com or cbs4indy.com.
He's doing so good, too. We hadn't lost him in a while.
No, we hadn't. All of a sudden, boom. There is no off-season, Beech Grove Wi-Fi. Like, we need you to step up here. It might be the off-season for the Colts, but there's no off-season for us. But after last off-season, which was the off-season of the wide receiver, and we saw such big money go out to different players from different teams, for different reasons, or teams let guys go for different reasons. Even though this year's wide receiver free agent class, Joe, is not quite as accomplished as last year's was, given the hyper focus over the last year, I think, on wide receiver, just in general in the NFL and ours with the Colts for several years running now, diving into what the Colts have, what the Colts can get, and what the Colts' plan might be moving forward is probably the next best thing we could take after talking about quarterback.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned the Super Bowl at the top of the show and how these teams built their units and put together their wide receiver cores, and it's pretty apparent to me, even going back to before this past year with the Chiefs visiting the Super Bowl when Patrick Mahomes was still on a rookie contract. They could pay guys their big money, Tyreek Hill that big money, and then when you get Patrick Mahomes, an elite level quarterback, you kind of got to make decisions elsewhere. And they still make the Super Bowl because he's that good of a quarterback that he can kind of carry a team. You look at the Bengals last year, who have elite options at wide receiver and a quarterback on a rookie contract. You look at the Eagles this year, spending the money and the draft capital to get an A.J. Brown, paying him, $25 million a year, I'm pretty sure. Spending the year before draft capital on Devontae Smith in the first round. A second-round pick went to Dallas Goedert, one of the better tight ends in the league.
The year before that, they drafted Jalen Reagor in the first round, right before Justin Jefferson.
Exactly.
Yay.
So, the thought was there. The execution, not as much.
Not that year.
Not that year. But the plan is clear. The blueprint is clear. Get a young quarterback and surround him with as much talent as possible, because that's what he's going to need to succeed. If he doesn't really catch on within those first 2, 3, 4 years, you kind of got to move on. And sometimes I feel like these quarterbacks had the talent and they just didn't have what it took around them to reach that level.
First of all, there's a tremendous article right now online at The Ringer that kind of details everything that we're talking about here and some things that I really wanted to get into between the Eagles and the Chiefs' approach to wide receiver this past offseason and why they're different. I highly encourage you to go online and read it, just because the Colts at wide receiver has been a topic of much consternation over recent years, and what they should do, what they are doing, how it has worked, how it has not worked. But between the Chiefs and the Eagles, like what the Chiefs did, like you said, like they have Mahomes, and they don't need a Tyreek Hill as much because you have Mahomes. Like for the Eagles, they had a young quarterback that was coming up and needed some help. Like they just could not attack the middle of the field last year. Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert are really good on the edges. They had no one to attack the middle. So teams could really defend them more heavily outside the numbers, and that helped them also whenever Jalen Hurts was trying to run the ball. Like it was a obvious glaring weakness in their offense. What do? They go out and get A.J. Brown, who's one of the better open field, middle field receivers in the league. Boom, fix it up. One of the better receivers, period, in the league. Boom. That's it right there. The Chiefs in the early years under Mahomes, they were chucking it deep all the time. And teams recently, over the past 2 years, have really tried to prevent that from happening. And the Chiefs have had to change as an offense because of it. And so what Tyreek Hill does best, go deep, he can't do as much anymore. He's still a great receiver. Don't get me wrong. But you don't want to pay him for past production when you think his future production isn't going to be exactly the same. So the Chiefs had A, Patrick Mahomes, and B, a different offense that Tyreek Hill wasn't as elite at. Not as elite. And so they could afford to go a different way at wide receiver. And I think we're going to see something similar with the Bengals. Like the Bengals, the first year with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, they're chucking it deep left and right. This year, Jamar Chase was different. He was not what he was 2 years ago in Joe Burrow's second year, I guess, and Jamar Chase's rookie year. If teams continue to really put the lid on that Bengals offense, that offense is going to have to adapt, improvise, overcome what defenses are trying to do against it. And maybe Jamar Chase is not going to be as valuable to that team in years moving forward. But I do think the Bengals, it's a different thing with T. Higgins and Boyd right now. Tyler Boyd, we'll get into them a little bit as free agents this year. But it was just a really interesting article to me after everything that happened last year with receivers, whether it was Christian Kirk, Amani Toomer, Marquise Brown, A.J. Brown being traded. This year, it's going to be far different, but it was a tremendous article that outlined why these two teams did things different. For me, it really came down to Patrick Mahomes is why the Chiefs were successful, Joe, without Tyreek Hill. is that he can still be the best quarterback in the NFL and not have Tyreek Hill on his team. The Eagles, Jalen Hurts could not be the best quarterback in the NFC, we'll say, without A.J. Brown on his team. It just wasn't possible. He's not there yet in his development as a quarterback, as a passer, as a leader of the offense. So both teams did exactly what they needed for the quarterback that they have, and that is why they are in the Super Bowl right now. So the Colts are going to need to do the best for the offense and the quarterback that they have next year. And to me, that means getting as many weapons as possible for a guy that you assume is going to be a rookie. Try to develop him along with some of these young weapons. You have the ammo, you have the cap space, you have whatever it is to have guys that you think can fit in your offense. You can spend money at wide receiver now because you're not going to spend money on a quarterback really for the next 4 or 5 years, assuming you draft a guy here in the first round. So all that to say, that's kind of the path that I see the Colts going on over the next couple years is drafting a quarterback, and they'll have some money to spend on wide receiver and hopefully bring in some weapons to give the quarterback no excuses in terms of his development with those receivers.
Yeah, and that's clearly the plan that's gotten teams to the Super Bowl in recent years, and that brings us to Michael Pittman Jr. because they're going to need to pay him to keep him. You know, you get talk about bringing in other weapons to make this passing attack even more dangerous, and I do think that is necessary as well, but you don't want to take a piece away at the same time. And Michael Pittman Jr., while he hasn't been an elite wide receiver, he's been a very good wide receiver.
No doubt. And over just last year, he had 99 catches. We were saying in the preseason, I remember talking just how much we saw Matt Ryan go to Pittman in a training camp, that his floor was basically 100 catches, and he was just right there at 99 this year. And he was able to get up to that even with how abysmal the Colts passing offense was. And we saw a shell of Michael Pittman Jr., honestly, Joe, this last year. We've said it here in this room. I've said it outside of this room that no one could be more upset that Carson Wentz was gone than Michael Pittman Jr. because what the Colts had on offense this year was anemic. It was unable to go downfield. And we just did not see that aspect of Pittman Jr.'s game. It was, even though he had 99 catches, it was not a great time to go into what is a pseudo contract year, even though he has one more year left on his deal. This is the year that you want to get a deal done with these guys. He had 88 catches for more than 1,000 yards the year before, basically 3 more yards per catch and 6 touchdowns as opposed to 4 touchdowns this year. So the job right now is to extend Pittman and to see what is comparable around the league for a deal with him. And they're just not cheap contracts anymore. There's 12 receivers right now whose cap hit was $20 million or more this past year. And if you're going to sign a guy like a Pittman that has certainly explosive potential, you kind of combine the last 2 seasons, what you've seen with him and his development, you know that it's not going to be cheap to resign, but it's one that the Colts are probably going to do in the long term.
Yeah, and he's still just 25. This isn't a guy at the end of his career. He could get even better. He's only played 3 years in the league. He's shown you a lot. He showed that he can be that possession guy for you this year. He showed that last year he's a guy capable of going down the field and making big plays for you, coming down with a lot of jump balls, and really underrated run after the catch ability as well. Looking through last year's contracts, I saw one that really stood out to me. Mike Williams re-signed with the LA Chargers on a 3-year, $60 million deal, $40 million guaranteed. So right at $20 million a year. The cap went up this year, so maybe for Pittman Jr. it's $22 million a year, or $23 or whatever it might be, just because there's that extra cap space. You know his agent's going to be bringing that up. But I think these are two guys with kind of similar talent levels, one might say, between Pittman Jr. and Mike Williams. Those guys where you go, he's a really good wide receiver. There's always going to be the questions, is he a true number one? That's going to be a big question for the Chargers, who might have to cut Keenan Allen, and they're kind of in salary cap hell right now. But I think, especially for the Colts, if you're not sold on Michael Pittman Jr. being that long-term guy that you want to commit to 100%, rather than a 5-6 year deal, just give him the $3 million, $20 million a year, make him happy, and get somebody that your young quarterback can grow with for at least the next 3 years.
Yeah, but I really like that, because he is not like I don't love the discussion about is he a true number one with anybody, and the level of elite receiver play in the NFL is like comparing Michael Pittman Jr. to a Tyreek Hill or a Devontae Adams. He's not there. And anyone who tries to say he's there is just wrong. Like there's the elite of the elite up there, guys like a Hopkins, like a Hill, like a
Stephon Diggs.
Exactly, like Diggs, a perfect example. And like he's just not there. Might he get there? Maybe. Am I betting on him getting there? No, not right now, because he hasn't shown me enough in his first 3 years to really show that to make me bet, quote unquote, that he will get there. He showed me a lot of good things. I think he can be a solid wide receiver. I love to have him on the team. On my team, I would love to have him because he's steady. You know what he can do. I thought that this last year he needs to work on his hands a little bit. There were too many times that he was some costly drops, and he had the game 2 years ago. The Tampa Bay game was like his worst game that I've ever seen him play in his career. That the Colts should have won that game. He had a couple really bad plays. Got outjumped by Antoine Winfield for an interception that was on a deep ball. That Winfield's like 5'10", and he's like 6'3", and Frank Reich was always singing his praises about he like never lost a one-on-one ball deep. It was just you've seen the worst of Michael Pittman. That is it. But that is not who he is consistently. So he needs to be a more consistent receiver. It'll help to have a more consistent quarterback play around him. Let's not
Absolutely.
let's not put that past him. And maybe the first couple years, honestly, of a new deal with a rookie quarterback, it's going to be hard for him to have consistent quarterback play. So over these next 2 years, maybe we still don't see the best of Michael Pittman Jr. Maybe it takes until year 3 or year 4 with a rookie quarterback coming in until we see him really take a significant step forward. So you can't pay him as the elite of the elite this year. You don't try to think he's the elite of the elite this year, but you can't just sign Michael Pittman Jr., Joe, is what I'm saying, and say our receiver problems are fixed. We've got our number one, we've got our guy, and then we can just fill in whoever around there. It's Michael Pittman Jr., and if you really want to have a dynamic and explosive and dangerous receiver group and one that will help a rookie quarterback come along.
And that even goes for the teams with the best receivers. I mean, I remember the Bills GM talking about not having enough to go next to Diggs and how they weren't bad enough to get a Jamar Chase in that press conference. Or what do you say? We didn't suck enough to get a Jamar Chase or something like that. You just need multiple threats on your offense, and Michael Pittman Jr., it needs to be just one of them. They need to keep adding to this core. Hopefully Pierce, who we'll talk about in a second, can kind of take that next step and be a guy who defenses need to worry about more in his second year. But anyone who says that Michael Pittman Jr. is not worth $20 million a year has not been paying attention to the wide receiver market.
You're correct about that. He absolutely is. I fully expect the Colts to get a deal done with him. I would like a 3-year deal, kind of like you said. I doubt that they go 5 or 6 with him. Maybe they do, but 3 years is perhaps more likely right now. Excuse me. Paris Campbell will turn 26 years old in July, and he played in all 17 games. That was Paris's primary goal, I think, for this past season. Played in every game, stayed healthy, and was on the field. 63 catches for 623 yards and 2 touchdowns. Had only 5 carries for 58 yards. And I think that the sentiment, Joe, you pointed this out before we started the podcast, on Paris is very much split, whether Colts fans want to bring him back or let him walk. And if you talk about Paris, the guy, I love the dude. He was, if not for Zaire Franklin, he would have been our choice, the media's choice for our good guy award that we get to, that is honest with us in the locker room, that is open with us, that will talk at any time. So I'm glad that he's in the locker room because I can ask him a question and he will give me a direct and honest answer. And he has for years, like with his injuries. He's always been open about what's been wrong with him and how frustrated he's been and how much he's been really wanting to get back on the field. So that's why I was happy for him that he was able to play every game this year, seeing a guy overcome all those injuries that he had. But you can't call him right now what he was coming out of college at Ohio State. He doesn't have the same explosiveness, the same quickness, or at least he hasn't showed it right now over the past year. Like 63 catches for 623 yards, that's, again, less than 10 yards per catch. Not saying that he was helped out all that much by quarterback play in Indianapolis this year, but once again, you don't want to pay big money for a guy who has injury history and then has not quite shown the dynamic play coming out of it yet. So that the Colts are at a strange place, I think, with Paris Campbell, and it depends on what else goes on in terms of free agency and who's available via trade, perhaps, whether they decide to bring Paris Campbell back this year.
Yeah, starting with the injuries, you got to wonder, because this is 1 year he has been healthy. Is this an outlier or is this a new normal for Paris? You have to wonder that first and foremost. Hopefully it's the new normal, but you just don't know. Second of all is the money that you sink into him. You're right. He did not look like that elite speed demon that he was coming out of college. Just the eye test watching him, he didn't look slow out there by any means, but he didn't look like somebody who could take it to the house every time he touched the football, which is what he looked like his rookie year. I remember that game against the Steelers. I mean, he almost ran out of his shoes. He was so fast. I think he tripped
and then
himself
dropped the ball.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
he did a lot better at that this year. His hands
Much
looked
better.
good.
Yes.
But you just, if he showed that ability, I would say yes, re-sign him, because this can be an elite weapon that the Colts thought he could be coming out of college. I'm just not seeing that. I'm not like dead set against bringing him back if the money's right, but there's a few contracts from last year that I thought might be on the table for Paris Campbell, either here or elsewhere. At the high end of that range, I looked at Russell Gage. All these guys on this list are about 26, about the same age, but he was coming off back-to-back 700-yard seasons in Atlanta. He got a 3-year, $30 million, $20 million guaranteed with Tampa Bay. If Paris gets that deal in the offseason, good for him, but
it
it's
ain't
not
going to be here.
It's not going to be with the Colts. In the mid-tier of that, I saw Cedric Wilson, who had his quote-unquote breakout season with the Cowboys in 2021, 600 yards, 6 touchdowns. He got a 3-year, $22 million deal with Miami for about $13 million guaranteed. I think that's somewhat reasonable for Paris Campbell. And then there was a couple prove-it deals out there, which Paris might be interested in if he wants to bet on himself staying healthy again and kind of squash some of those rumors. If he wants to bet on him getting some of that explosiveness back in his second full year without injury. DJ Chark was one of them at the high end of the prove-it deals. He got a full $10 million fully guaranteed on a 1-year deal with Detroit. Not dissimilar from what the Colts gave Devin Funchess a couple years ago. And then at the low end, Juju Smith-Schuster, who's playing in the Super Bowl, he had that great year with Pittsburgh in 2018, 1,400 yards, not as much the last couple years, was injured in 2021 before free agency, played just 5 games. He got a 1-year, $3.7 million deal, just 2.5 guaranteed, but it had an additional $8.5 million in incentive bonuses, many of which he hit. He had over 70 catches, 900 yards with them. They're playing in the Super Bowl. I was looking up the incentives. He played 45% of the snaps in the championship game. If he had played 50%, he would have made an extra $1 million.
Ooh.
But he got hurt, so that's unfortunate for him. But I think a deal like Juju Smith-Schuster's makes a ton of sense for Paris Campbell. Be like, we believe in you. You're going to have to show it to us again and maybe put a lot of incentives in there for him to really prove his ability. But if I was the Colts, that would be the one that I lean towards.
Yeah, if you're going to sign him for a couple of years, it's not going to be for $20 million. It's not. It might be for around 10, like 3 years 30, 3 years 25, in that range. But if you're right, if he's more attuned to a 1-year deal, then something along the lines of what Schuster had makes a lot of sense for him. So that's I'm not offering a lot of direction with this because I honestly don't know what the Colts are going to do. I don't know what direction they want to go with Paris. So we'll see.
This could very well be one of those guys who they go, all right, test the market. If you can get something better, go for it. If not, come back. We'll take you back.
Yep. I wouldn't be surprised with that. Alec Pierce is under contract for 3 more years. You hope that he takes the next step in his development next year. Ashton Doolin will be a free agent. Dave's breakout player of the year for the Colts had 15 catches for 207 yards, both of them career highs, so I wasn't wrong. But I was wrong.
It was a breakout for him.
Yeah, exactly. It's a breakout for him. He's still split really between offense and special teams, his snaps there. As an all-pro special teams player in 2021. I think this comes down to whether the Colts want to keep him for special teams purposes or not. Because if you're just keeping him for a wide receiver after this last year, it's like, whatever. But if you want to keep some more veteran special teams guys on your roster, then maybe you sign him for 1 year again right here.
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind, especially if they don't bring back Paris. Bring him back on a maybe 1 or 2 year deal. He got $2.5 million last year, maybe make it $3.5 million this year, something really affordable because I think he's a solid number 4 guy and good on special teams. So he's not going to cost you too much to bring him back. And you do want to keep, just going into next year with Pittman, Pierce, and Mike Strawn isn't a great strategy. So you're probably going to spend more on bringing an exterior player in than you would retaining Doolin.
Speaking of Strawn, he is also under contract for 2 more years, had 5 catches in his career. He's 26 in August. Haven't seen much of Strawn yet, but he still remains a tantalizing prospect. We'll see if he actually can make the field next year. Free agent wide receivers. Nowhere near, Joe, what we saw last year when there were guys like Tyreek Hill that changed locations. Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, and DK Metcalf all got huge extensions themselves. Devontae Adams, Marquise Brown, Amari Cooper, like I said. This was a huge offseason this past offseason.
Well, even most of those guys were trades.
They were. A lot of them were. So maybe some of these guys, maybe some other guys are available via the trade market.
When I think that's exactly what's happened here. Teams that don't want to pay their wide receivers rather than just losing them in free agency, they trade them a year early to get something back for them because they're so valuable.
It reminds me of NBA free agency a little bit in this because you get to a point with a guy and you're not going to re-sign him. Like the Pacers seem to be with Miles Turner, but then they re-signed him for a couple extra years. Like you get to a point with a guy that if you can't re-sign him, if you can't agree to a deal, you're right. Like get something in return for him. And like with the Titans, a perfect example, letting A.J. Brown go to the Eagles for a 1st and a 3rd round pick, I believe, because they weren't going to sign him to a 4-year, $100 million deal.
They should have.
The GM got fired this year because it was hilarious. He got fired the day after A.J. Brown torched him for however much it was and just embarrassed him. It was funny, but not funny for him. It was just very obvious what was happening that he was fired for basically letting one of the best receivers in the NFL go. And that's a mistake you cannot make in the NFL today.
Unless you have Patrick Mahomes.
Exactly. And the Titans don't have Patrick Mahomes, and the Colts don't have Patrick Mahomes. Like if you have a stud wide receiver, you can't just let him go. Marquise Brown's another one, I guess. You have Lamar Jackson still, but he didn't want to see him go. And Lamar Jackson is still not Patrick Mahomes. He's an MVP. He's an incredible player. I'm still not putting him on the level of Patrick Mahomes. So, yikes. Free agent wide receivers this year. Jacoby Myers. If we're leading off with Jacoby Myers, for the love, Joe, this is as good as we got. Has back-to-back 800-yard seasons with the Patriots. He's 26 years old.
For the record, I think Jacoby Myers would be an upgrade over Paris Campbell. You put him in the slot, I think he could work really well with Pittman and Pierce on the outside, Jacoby working the slot. But yeah, it just comes down to who's going to be willing to pay this guy, and I think someone's going to be willing to pay him more than the Colts are.
Yep. Juju Smith-Schuster, who you mentioned already, had 78 catches, 933 yards this year. Like you said, an incentive-laden deal proved that he can still deliver. And these are stats, once again, with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback, so I don't expect him to get 80 catches for 900 yards elsewhere, but he still proved that he could be a 700 or 800 yard probably catch with a average to good quarterback, 700 yards catching, receiving, what am I saying, around the league. So he'll get probably a couple years after a year like this. That's what I think.
I think so, too. I don't think he fits with the Colts because I think they need speed. They kind of have the towers on the outside. You need a speed guy.
Like Mecole Hardman.
Exactly.
Yeah, from Kansas City as well. He'll turn 25 in March. In his 4-year career, he has 151 catches for more than 2,000 yards, 16 touchdowns. Certainly a big play threat, Hardman is. Would certainly fit that bill, a guy that can, Joe, take the top off the defense.
Yeah, and he, at once upon a time, was a similar sort of player than what the Colts thought they were getting with Paris Campbell, the guy who anytime he touches it could go all the way. I still see that speed with Mecole Hardman. He has been a bit of a draft bust, second-round pick who just never really developed into anything more than a speed guy. But if the price is right, I would not mind seeing them bring Hardman in because they do need more speed in that receiving core.
Alan Lazard, DJ Chark, Darius Slayton, Marvin Jones, Jarvis Landry, all free agent wide receivers that are going to be pending free agent wide receivers. If you want to bring in somebody who's a veteran, I wouldn't be opposed to that, like in the vein of a Marvin Jones, because this Colts receiver room is still young, Joe. Like we talked about it last year, that how how young this group was. And like we say that like having such poor quarterback play did not really help them achieve what they could, but their youth, I'm sure, did not help the quarterback achieve what he could in certain scenarios too. It's a catch-22, and they're both kind of at odds with each other. You need veteran presence, and you can say, "Oh, the Colts had something in Reggie Wayne." He's like but you have a coach always. Like, you need a veteran receiver in the room to kind of be old reliable. When Michael Pittman can't catch one game, like throw it to somebody else. You got to have somebody else who's dangerous, and nobody has developed that yet because the Colts pass catchers are so young. Like, if you want to go out and get a guy like a Marvin Jones, is what I'm saying, I wouldn't be completely opposed to that. I've really liked Marvin Jones' game for a long time. He certainly seemed to help Trevor Lawrence last year in Jacksonville. But out of those guys, like that, like I said earlier, these are not dynamic names who are free agents because teams will try to lock up their receivers now. We're getting to the point where it's like other most important positions, like a pass rusher in the NFL. You rarely see those guys hit free agency because teams always lock them up or potentially trade them. So finding a dynamic wide receiver in free agency is maybe not going to be easy or harder in the coming years than it even has been over the past 5 years or so.
Not to mention it, I don't know what Chris Ballard has done that would show you that this will be the year he's going to spend money on a wide receiver. I mean, any of these guys is probably going to get a contract bigger than what they're actually worth because that's just kind of how it goes. You overpay, and then in a couple of years, maybe that contract is in line with market or becomes a bargain. The only guy that gets me somewhat excited on the list might be a Jacoby Myers, but I really think he's going to get around $10 million a year from somebody.
Wide receivers who could be available via trade. Like you said, a lot of those guys that I mentioned, Joe, were trade bait, both teams who did not want to pay these guys. But Mike Evans would be certainly a veteran on the list. Very much in the same vein as Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, big guys.
Yeah, kind of a bit redundant in his style of wide receiver. But
it could be. Jerry Jeudy for Denver.
I think he'd fit really well.
Joe loves him some Jerry Jeudy.
Put him in the slot. He's got the speed. He's another guy who can drop a few from time to time, but when he does it, he's dangerous with it. The only thing is, are the Colts going to want to, if you trade for Jeudy, he's going to demand about $20 million a year too. So are they going to want to pay him and Pittman $20 million a year at the same time while both are pretty good but not really elite? I don't know about that, but I think just looking at how they would fit in the offense, Jerry Jeudy would be great.
Cincinnati has some real decisions to make starting right now because they're going to have T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, their number 2 and number 3 receivers, up for possibility to have a contract extension this year. And then Joe Burrow's coming, and then Jamar Chase is coming. So this is the year maybe you start to see the first steps of that plan as to what you're going to do on offense, whether they re-sign guys like T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd right now, whether they wait till the end of their contracts to see what happens. Very intriguing between these two. And, of course, if the Colts get a head coach in Brian Callahan, who is the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati, he would have at least more insight about the specific capabilities of these guys and the value of those guys in terms of what they could do with the offense he'd be bringing here. But that's taking about 8 steps forward when we're still at the starting line with this process right now. But still, got to mention those two as well, guys that could be potentially entering the last year of a contract that a team might look to trade and get some value from them.
Yeah, and Higgins is going to break the bank. I mean, he might demand more than Pittman. He really might, but...
Oh, he's had a better first couple years than Pittman. I mean, a little bit better. They were taken, 33, 34 in the draft?
Yeah, next to each other.
Yep.
And he has had slightly better career than Pittman has so far. He's also had a much better quarterback throwing him the football.
Not wrong.
So I think Tyler Boyd is kind of interesting. He would be that veteran presence. He could slide into the slot. No, he's not going to scare you with speed, but especially if they bring in Callahan, he's someone who knows the offense, could help the other wide receivers learn it, and be that veteran guy who's just reliable in the slot for whatever quarterback comes in.
The Colts have been pretty consistent recently in drafting a wide receiver. They've taken one in the second round in 3 of the last 4 drafts, Joe, whether it was Paris Campbell, then Michael Pittman, and then Alec Pierce. So Chris Ballard has given some valuable draft capital toward that, and we all know how much he values second-round picks, even more so, it seems, than first-round picks, Chris Ballard, during his couple years with the Colts. So you see that, and you recognize that he recognizes the importance of getting something set in that position. But other wide receivers drafted by him just haven't panned out. Mike Strawn, Des Patman, Jerice Fountain, Deion Kane. You haven't hit on any of those guys. It was harsh to see Jerice Fountain go down in the last preseason game when he had a stellar preseason with his knee injury. Deion Kane showed some flashes, but again, no consistency. So between all of those guys that Ballard has taken in early in drafts or late in drafts, I would not be surprised if he spends some more draft capital this year. I can't tell you whether it's going to be high or low just yet, but some draft capital on a wide receiver.
I think a lot of it's going to depend on how much capital they have left. You know, if they have to trade up to number 1 or decide that's what they have to do, they probably won't have that second round pick anymore. But if they stay at 4 and just take whoever's there, or believe that their guy will make it there, I think pairing him with another wide receiver is a great plan. 35th overall. Quit trading back. You look at the 3, and the jury's still out on Pierce. He could end up being very good. But both Campbell and Pierce were taken in the 50s. Pittman was taken in the 30s, and he has been head and shoulders the best wide receiver Chris Ballard has drafted so far. Newsflash, the best players get taken high in the draft. So trading back does not always pay off if you want those elite high-end guys who really make a difference in the game.
The Colts have drafted in first-round receivers 3 times since the turn of the century. Famously, Philip Dorsett, 29th overall in 2015, as Joe shakes his head. Anthony Gonzalez with the last pick in the first round in 2007, who was good when he was healthy, but wasn't healthy all the time. And then Reggie Wayne, 30th overall in 2001, when the Colts had 87 other needs, but took the best player available. It turned out to be pretty good for them with Reg. And this year, they will not take a wide receiver in the first round unless they trade up. And there's no way Chris Ballard trades down from 4th. I'm not going to speak that into existence, not even as a joke. But 4th overall right now in the first round, 35th overall there in the second round. They're 79th in the third round. That's the pick from Washington in the Carson Wentz trade. Then they have 1 4th-round pick, 2 5th-round picks. One of them is from Buffalo in that Nyheim Hines deal. 1 in the 6th, 2 in the 7th right now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 picks right now. We know how much Chris Ballard loves them picks. But, Joe, I think you hit the nail on the head. How many of those would have to go in a deal to move up? I don't think you're going to mess too much with 5th, 6th, 7th-round picks in deals to move up to number 1. But 1st through 3rd, maybe, and then next year as well with 1sts, 2nds, players that you currently have on your roster who are Pro Bowl, All-Star, All-Pro caliber level. So there's going to be, I think, a bevy of picks for the Colts still in rounds 4 through 7 when they get down there. Just the question is how many of those up top, 1st through 3rd, will they have? And then will they use any of them on receivers? Because like you said, that's when the more dynamic receivers go near the top of the draft. So are you going to spend some capital there to try to fix or try to continue to improve a room that could use some improvement? And we'll probably see a good idea of what the Colts' plans are in terms of high, low capital in the draft after we get through free agency and we see if the Colts are interested in signing anyone like a Jacoby Myers, like a Marvin Jones or a Jarvis Landry, guys like that. If that happens, then maybe the Colts don't draft a receiver as high. If it doesn't happen, then I would not be surprised to see the Colts spend a 2nd or 3rd round pick there on another receiver in that room.
Yeah, and the other holes they fill might clue us in as well. If they, which I really think they should do, go sign a veteran right guard who can be sturdy for you, then you don't have to look at that position as deeply in the 2nd and 3rd round. Same with, cornerback, the defensive end, basically anywhere you want to look. You can kind of clue in on what teams are going to do by seeing what positions they addressed aggressively in free agency. We'll see. Chris Ballard is never all that aggressive in free agency. He has his own strategy, but there's several holes on this team. I understand that just pounding wide receiver might be curious to some, but I think it's easier to plug in a veteran guard than it is to break the bank for a wide receiver when there are a lot of wide receivers every year who enter the draft, come in right away, and can produce for you.
Just look at how important great weapons are by looking at the teams that have played for the AFC and NFC championships, Joe. You got the Chiefs, obviously, with Patrick Mahomes, is in a world of himself.
And he has Kelsey, who's
elite.
I was going
to say. He could be the best tight end, of his era. With the Bengals, you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. For the Eagles, you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. For the 49ers, you have Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. Ayuk as well. Like he gets shoved to the background, Brandon Ayuk.
First round pick wide receiver.
He's still a pretty darn good player.
Yeah.
So like it's crucial to have elite pass catching weapons. And I even include Christian McCaffrey in that. He's a great runner of the football, no doubt, but he is also an elite pass catcher. And that's what the NFL is right now. It's attacking down the field. It's the run game is not what it's focused on offense like it was 15 years ago, 10 years ago. It's just not like that. You need weapons to get the ball deep down the field, to make plays in space, and to win games that way.
You got to have enough so that when the defense game plans to take something away, you have enough other options that you go, okay, we'll just go here. You look at the Eagles. A.J. Brown, in their 2 playoff games, didn't even get 30 receiving yards. They were perfectly fine because they have Devontae Smith and a great running game and Dallas Goedert to lean on. You got to be able to say, oh, you're taking this away? That's fine with us. We'll go right here.
Yep. And the Colts haven't had that in recent years. They've been a one-trick pony.
Taylor or nothing,
or
basically.
Really, last year they were a zero-trick pony, yes, to be fair on offense. And I'm not saying that to try to exhibit a laugh out of anybody. I'm saying that dead seriously. It was a terrible offense. It was bad and needs improvement. And now's the time where you start to do that, or you start to lay the groundwork to starting to do that. And whoever the head coach is going to be is going to obviously play a big role in that, and talking with Chris Ballard about what he wants. Chris Ballard will play a big role in deciding how much he's willing to spend in free agency. And maybe Jim Irsay plays a big role if he continues to expand his reach into the organization like he did several times this past year. To be determined on all those fronts. It's certainly going to be an interesting offseason ahead, and our discussions on different positions will continue next week here on this podcast. Are we going to go defensive end maybe next, another dynamic position? There's a bunch of them that we can get to, but hey, if Gus Bradley's coming back,
next,
then my guy Unique could come back as well.
Is Unique coming back? Have Kwity Paye and Dio Dengbo shown enough? Do you still need to bring someone in, even if you keep everybody?
I think that's a good debate. I really think that's a good debate, and we'll get to that next week. I don't even want to get into it now because we've already gone long enough already, and there was enough to talk about with wide receiver today. So really eager to see what the Colts do at receiver this offseason, what chance they have to improve that unit, and everything else in the franchise right now, so we can start making some more concrete predictions for this offseason, or concrete steps forward as to what's going on here in Indianapolis. So we appreciate you all listening. For the Beech Grove Hamster, for Mike Chappell, for Joe Hopkins, I'm Dave Griffiths. We'll see you next week on the Colts Blue Zone podcast.